Hey, what's going on everybody? Today I'll be showing you how to replace the rear shocks of some Mk1 Volkswagen Tiguan. This has a 2.0 turbo TSI engine. If you know a little bit more about these engines, it has a CCTA engine code. So let's get started. As far as what you'll need, you're going to need new shocks obviously, and then I have the bump stops to go along with it. I have a 1/2 inch ratchet with a 21mm socket, a 17mm socket for the wheels, and then an 18mm socket. Right here I have a 3/8 drive ratchet with a 17mm socket and a 16mm socket, and then about a 10-inch extension. I have a 1/4 inch ratchet with a Torx T25 bit socket, an 18mm wrench, a 21mm wrench, a tapered punch, a small pocket screwdriver, a rag, and one extra glove. That's for a trick that I'm going to show you. And then if you're doing this on the ground, you're going to need a floor jack and one jack stand to hold up the body of the vehicle while you decompress with the floor jack. And if you're doing it on a lift like me, you're just going to need a pole jack. Go ahead and remove the black caps from both wheels. So to do that, you just take your small 90-degree pick, insert it into the hole, and then you pull. Before you lift the car up off the ground, you want to break loose all of those lug bolts right there. If you don't break those loose before you lift it off the ground, the wheel is going to turn on you and you can't break them loose. So to do that, I have my long 1/2 inch ratchet with a 17mm socket. I'm going to break those loose, lift the car up, and then remove those. Now I'm pretty spoiled here with this car lift, so I'm going to lift the car all the way up in the air. But what you're going to need to do is take the floor jack, and you're going to jack the back of the car up right there on the pinch weld, and then you're going to place a floor jack underneath there on the pinch weld and lower the car back down onto it. We're doing that so that we can get the wheels off the ground. Once the wheels are off the ground, we're going to take both back wheels off. Once you remove those, be ready to catch the wheel because those are lug bolts, not lug studs. So once you take the bolts out, the wheel is just going to fall down. If you're doing this in your garage on the ground, this is where you're going to take your floor jack and you're going to put it right here on the lower control arm and apply just a little bit of upward pressure. If you're doing it on a lift like me, this is where you can use your screw jack or your screw pole, and you're going to do the same thing. You're just going to put a little bit of upwards pressure, and then we're going to focus on taking that bolt, and then on the other side is the nut. We're going to focus on taking that out, both of which are an 18mm. So I'm going to use a ratchet with an 18mm on one side and then a wrench on the other side to counter hold it, and then I'm just going to loosen those and take that bolt and nut off. Once you have that bolt out, we can go ahead and loosen the pole jack. And because it is under spring pressure, it's going to naturally push down, and we're just going to slowly lower it until there's no more pressure. Now that all the tension is loosened up and the control arm is hanging down, I'm just going to simply take the spring out. Pretty easy. You're just going to maneuver it, lift it up and out of there. Most of the time the top bushing will come out with it and the bottom one will stay in the control arm. And then when you go back in with the spring in the later steps, you're going to make sure that the edge of the spring right there matches up where it was on the lower bushing. It's kind of hard to see on camera, but you'll know where it matches up and you just want to put it back exactly in the same spot. Next, I'm going to focus on this lower bolt right here on the bottom of the shock. It is a 21mm, so I'm either going to use a wrench or a ratchet with a 21mm socket. So go ahead and take that bolt out. So now I have the bottom of the shock loose, and as you can see there's a washer on the inside and the outside. So when you're going back in, you just want to make sure that you have those washers. Now we're going to focus on the top of the shock, and the top of the shock is held in by two 16mm bolts. So there's one right here and then another one right here. Now as far as gaining access to that, all I'm going to do is remove this T25 screw right here and right here, and that allows me to maneuver this enough. Now, if you're finding it difficult to get to that bolt right there or right there, you can remove the fender liner. So it's just a bunch of these screws right here. Only reason I'm not removing it is because I have mud flaps, and that does make the job harder. Most of these Tiguans aren't going to have mud flaps, so for you to remove the fender liner, it's actually pretty easy. So it's up to you, but you do need to get access to those bolts right there, and you're just going to remove both of those bolts, and then you're going to bring the shock down. So what seems to work pretty easy for me is I just have a long 3/8 extension with the 16mm socket on the end of it, and then I'm just going to put a ratchet on it, and I can get to both of them pretty easily. Alright, now that I have the shock out, there's two things that we're going to focus on. We're going to focus on loosening up this bump stop right here, and to do that I may need a little tiny screwdriver, kind of wiggle it loose, and then we're going to pull this down. Then we're going to look at the top right here. There's a little cap. Same thing, you can just use this pocket screwdriver and pop that off. Alright, so the next step is to get the top mount or bearing off. And I'm not going to be doing this by the book because there is a special pass-through socket that I do not have. I may get some hate for this in the comments, that's okay. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this rag with a spare glove right here, and then what I do, and it works pretty well, is I put it around the shaft right there, and the glove creates friction, and then I squeeze right here. So while I'm squeezing right here, I can either take a ratchet with a 16mm socket and take that off. But what I find easier is if you have some power tools, one that is strong enough, that'll zip that right off. That's going to make your life a lot easier if you have power tools. And the reason I'm doing this is because we do not want that shaft spinning. If that shaft spins while you're trying to zip it off, that can ruin the internals of the shock. Alright, so I ended up using this power tool right here, and this is one of the weaker Milwaukee power tools, and it took it right off. So go ahead and separate the top mount from the shock itself. Since I'm replacing the shocks today, I'll be discarding the shock and the bump stop and reusing the dust shield. So to get the dust shield off, simply comes off with the bump stop. And then once I have it off of the shock, I'm just going to separate the bump stop from the dust shield. Alright, so looking at the dust shield and the bump stop, if you look right there, you can see there's a little notch. And where we're trying to get this dust shield over is right here. Now I find what makes it easiest is sort of doing a twisting motion to where it gets into that little cutout right there. And then once it gets into that cutout, it makes it pretty easy to continue twisting, and then it pops in. So from this point, everything is reverse order. So now I'm just going to slide my dust shield with the bump stop over the shaft and then pull it all the way down as far as I can. And then I'm going to put this back on and then tighten the nut back up. Alright, so I've got my setup ready to go. I'm going to use this friction right here to keep the shaft from spinning, and then I'm going to tighten it down with my impact. Now you're going to hear when it bottoms out, there's going to be a noticeable sound difference when it tightens up all the way. When you hear that difference in sound, stop, because that means it's tight. Go ahead and maneuver the bump stop all the way into the mount, and you're just going to keep pushing it up until it's flush about right here. And that's what it looks like when it's fully inserted. Don't forget your cap. Go ahead and take the entire assembly, line it back up at the top, and then you're going to start the bolts by hand. Make sure you start them by hand because you do not want to cross thread these bolts because that is part of the body. Once you have the top bolts tightened up, you can go ahead and reinstall your fender liner or your two T25s that you took out. Now we're going to put the bottom bolt back into the shock with the washers, and you may notice that the holes don't line up perfectly. So one may sit lower than the other, and what I found works best is pulling down right here with your right hand, and that's going to line up the holes to where you can feed in the bolt and the washers with your left hand. And this is what it's going to look like when you're trying to line it up. So So once you get that lined up, start that bolt by hand. All right, got that bolt in and tightened down. And then the next step is going to be putting the spring back in. So what I was talking about is you can kind of see where the spring was. So the end of the spring is going to stop right here. So you just want to match the bottom of the spring up right there. So that finger. All right, got the bottom lined up, and then at the top, you're just going to line it up with the body right there. And make sure you have your rubber bushing. Now we're going to use our floor jack or pole jack, and then we're going to apply upwards pressure again. And you may have to push forward just a little bit to get these to line up while you're going upwards. And then this should go over right here. If you don't do this type of job every day, this is probably the most frustrating part, is lining these holes up. Now what I find best is to grab a tapered punch like this. And what I can do is I can insert it in right here, and I can slightly maneuver until they line up. Also, if you look at the bottom right here, you might be able to take a small pry bar or even use the same punch, and you can put it right there, and then you can get them to line up. Once it's lined up, go ahead and throw that bolt in coming from the back. That way the nut is on the front. If you find that you can't quite get the bolt all the way through, what you can start doing is ratcheting it, and it'll spin its way the rest of the way through. So for time's sake, I'm just going to use a small impact gun, and I'm going to show you how that works. While you still have the pressure of the jack holding everything up and together, go ahead and tighten that nut and bolt down. Go ahead and put the wheels on, insert the lug bolts and tighten them down by hand, lower the vehicle down onto the ground, and then torque them down. After you torque them down, you're going to take your black caps, pretty easy to put back on, you just kind of center them up and then push in. I appreciate you guys taking the time to watch this video. If you don't mind, please hit that subscribe button, notification bell, you know, all the buttons except for the thumbs down button. Until next time, you guys, peace.